Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me in the back? Great. My name's Dennis Chamberlain. I'm a representative from the DeKalb Asgrow Seed Company, who's here on the floor at the show, and we're really proud to sponsor this event. Important to the dairy industry from the fact of being able to judge dairy cows and use these as learning events at the same time. I wanted to take just a moment before I introduce Dr. Schroeder to talk about another little opportunity where DeKalb and Monsanto work together to associate with farmers in their local communities. And I brought, I'll be up here in the corner, but I've got a little brochure here called America's Farmers. And this is a program that DeKalb and Monsanto had started a number of years ago to help farmers in their local communities to be able to give back. Well, what do I mean by that? Every year in each crop reporting district, we give away dollars to a farmer based on his representation on our website by drawing names out of the hat that gives a farmer an opportunity to contribute $2,500 to his local nonprofit organization in his community. That could be your EMS place, that could be the school, that could be a food pantry, anything based on that farmer getting recognized for that in their local community. We give those dollars away every year, every crop reporting district across the upper Midwest. In addition to that, we've got America's rural education program that allows your local schools to extend an application that's voted on by farmers each year that gives an opportunity for up to $25,000 to be able to be donated to that school to help in their math and science programs. So it's been a great opportunity for us to, again, on behalf of farmers, to be able to give back to those local communities. And then the last piece is, and I read this one, America's Grow Ag Leaders. And those are $1,500 scholarships that are available for young individuals coming out of college to be able, or coming out of high school to get an early start on their college education. So I've got more information on that. You can grab a brochure from me before you walk out of here today or stop by the DeKalb Asgrow booth. We've got them available. And again, we're very, very happy to be able to sponsor the program here today as well as the Dairy Expo in its entirety. So it's our pleasure to introduce the speaker here this morning, Dr. J.W. Schroeder. Dr. Schroeder is a native North Dakotan. He's from a purebred Holstein operation in North Dakota, has been in agriculture for over 40 years. And we started our conversation off this morning when we shook hands because although some people think about it as the national championship in football, but our two schools played each other and it's called the 1-2A or the 2AA championship game, North Dakota State against Illinois State last year, so I've realized that I got beat. But North Dakota State, and he told me, and he'll say this probably later, they have more championships in the last 4 years than they have losses. So that's pretty good, I think, for a school record. But he's 40 years in agriculture extension. He got his bachelor's degree out of North Dakota State. Then he went to Colorado State for his master's and came back to North Dakota State to finish his PhD work in the area of nutrition physiology. His passion has been in dairy as well as youth and agriculture. And he started in the Dairy Expo back in 1972 on a judging team here. And then he's back today to share some thoughts with you. His topic is on feed refusals, waste, or cost of doing business. So could you please join me in the ninth Wisconsin welcome for Dr. J.W. Schroeder.
Good morning. And to add to that, 10 years later, I came back as the coach of our state judging team, so I've always had fond memories of the World Dairy Expo. I, too, want to extend my gratitude to World Dairy Expo for inviting me, and especially to DeKalb for providing the resources that I could travel and be a part of this auspicious event. I'm going to start with a question to you. Feed bunk management, is it really that important? When we consider that total feed loss, just simply from storage to consumption, can reach as high as 30%, especially with high moisture feeds, and waste is a most significant part of that, and yet the methods for quantifying it are very difficult to describe, and it's also an area that's not that well researched. So I guess I have to admit we might be as much opinion as we have science in some of our discussion today. But I say to you, if your goal is to increase feed efficiency through to enhance profits, then I suspect your answer to that question would indeed be yes. Let's begin by looking at some factors that are affecting waste. Waste from a visible perspective is easy when we look at moldy feeds or spilled feeds. And with a little bit of work, we can find that some of those mixing and delivery errors that are contributing to overall waste. But eventually today what we're want to get to is the discarded refusals. They certainly have value. At every 1% of dry matter is about 5 to 6 cents per cow per day. But I also want to suggest to you that we have invisible losses. Invisible losses may be birds and rodents. They may be this under and over feeding of nutrients that are provided. But all of the discussion will focus on the diet today. Was it consumed, was it wasted, or was it indeed refused? It goes without saying that waste is a hole in the farmer's pockets. It's waste. It's most difficult. It's one of the most difficult areas to determine at the feed bunk how much is waste. When you consider this, if there's just a little scattered on the ground between the silage pile and the feed bunk, this could add up to as much as 3 to 5% that is being lost. And just recently reported in Horrid's Dairyman that the average U.S. feed shrink now is estimated that 8% of all feeds is contributing to a $2 billion a year loss. So it's certainly a complicated subject that with high costs of feeds makes one that's receiving a lot of attention and one that is often underestimated. The good news is you as managers and as laborers can improve feed efficiency, but it's one that we have to look at carefully, because are we actually sharpening our efficiency, or is there a potential to compromise the cow's response? And the answer to both of those is yes. Let's start with eating behavior. In this day of precision agriculture, everything is about how we can be applying technologies to be more precise. In the case of precision feeding, I would suggest to you that matching the exact amount of feed that's delivered to the cow is the precise amount that she can eat would be precision feeding. Now, this is not a new topic. When we look at researches that has particularly come out of the feedlot industry, my colleagues from South Dakota State, just south of us, is an example of some research that's been going on for some time. In this particular situation, now granted it's feedlot, that they managed, but they were able to manage the empty bunks while saving 12% of their feed costs and feed loss, 12% of their feed loss, and still had no difference in growth performance. Let me share with you just one graph from that research. As you can see here, the figure is showing the amount of dry matter that was delivered on a daily basis for the 60 days or 55 days in the lot. And this particular lot of cattle were fed to a slick bunk. Let's compare that to the group that was fed ad libitum. It becomes obvious that animals that are allowed to fend for themselves with unlimited feed access will have extremely variable feed intakes and will waste feed. This was some of the early research that suggested that indeed we can manipulate animals' behavior to reduce our feed costs and not lose any performance. The key here is what is adequate feed. Spanish researchers have established that herds practicing the routine push-ups and feeding for less refusal gained as much as 4 to 8 pounds per cow per day among cattle with similar genetics. We've heard a lot about the negative effects of bare bunk disease. It's certainly something that you as dairymen are very well aware of, but where's the research on the effects of eating too little or too much feed? Frankly, there isn't a lot of research out there compared to many of the areas that are researched. In this particular research by French and others reported in the Journal of Dairy Science, they evaluated the effects of what weighback might have on cow performance. You can see by the table that there were very little differences. In this research, the Holsteins were fed, of similar genetic background by the way, were fed either to 5% refusal at 23 hours post-feeding or to 2.5% at 18 hours after feeding. You can see by the table that there was really very little difference. Yes, there's a tendency one way or the other, but statistically there was no difference in dry matter intake, there was no difference in 4% milk, fat-corrected milk. They did make the observation, though, that these cows that were in the 5% restriction category had about 2 more hours of eating time during the day. And that's significant. Perhaps the slight differences that are showing up here is that the cows that were in the restricted 2.5% strategy may have been experiencing some ruminal acidosis. nonetheless, it, it suggests that there's a lot more to be looked at. So researchers from the University of Guelph, in a survey of 22 commercial farms, reported anywhere from 0 to 10% was common amount of refusal that were found in that study. Where there was high levels of refusals, they tended to have more sorting. No big surprise there. They also equated that for every 2% increase in the amount of refusals, it was associated with another 1.3% rise in cow group sorting. They further went on to analyze that for each 1% elevation in sorting, 1% in sorting corresponded to about a 3% reduction in overall feed efficiency. And this was partially suggested to be driven by sorting. In that same research, they also noted that refusals at 3 to 5% seemed to represent a minimal amount, and was an area that probably drove us to thinking that 5% was the way to go. You have to realize these research was preliminary. It was quite variable, and we need to keep in account the difference between the average of the pen, which could be easily 200-300 cows, and the individual cow response need to be considered here. Speaking of the individual cow, it was also noted, and this is from Penn State research, that in the tie stall situation, there's also the same similar sorting going on during the day. But that sorting is modified in that ultimately the cow eats the entire ration that's put in front of her just by nature of the individual feeding. I'd like to start by thanking Dr. Tim Clark from Ridley for sharing this particular graph with me, because as I mentioned, there's an area that's not a lot of hard research on it, but there's a lot of good stuff happening in the fields. In this particular situation, you can see 2 pens of cattle that were experiencing challenges with ruminal subacute ruminal acidosis, and dry matter inequities in the delivery of feed. When they corrected those, you can see on the right-hand side that the intakes, and that's this is pounds of dry matter intake on the side, became more consistent. They found that dry matter intake variation, once they got it down to about 2 to 3 pounds per cow, that they could have more consistent and reliable results, both on the consumption as well as production side. In other research by Husey out of Canada, he looked at the relationship to health as it compares to variable dry matter intake. On this graph, and it's a little bit small, dry matter intake across the top and their feeding or eating time across the bottom, starting 14 days prior to calving to 21 days post-calving. And the area that I've outlined for you, I'm just labeling as the critical period, which happens to be approximately 4 days plus or minus. You can see that intakes and eating time are extremely variable. So there's a lot going on here, and we need to be paying attention to if we're going to be making these kind of adjustments to the diet. The critical control points become the following when we're looking at lower refusals. For example, if we don't know the true dry matter intake, it's going to be difficult to be making the correct adjustments. You need to be making these adjustments on probably a weekly basis, and then not only correcting for dry matter, moisture, I should say, not only correcting for moisture, but then adjusting the ration accordingly. If daily dry matter intake then, based on the data we just looked at, exceeds 2 to 3 pounds of dry matter per cow per day, then there are other variables that need to be attended to first before we can just start cutting back on feed. Mainly what I've identified, some metabolic issues as well as some mixing irregularities. In another study by Husey, they looked at feeding behavior among heifers. Now, granted, this is not lactating cows, but I think it's interesting. Here's a research study where they exposed heifers to different quality of diet. The diets were of 3, 0, 24, and 39% of the dry matter in there was of a grain concentrate. This was to represent low, medium, and high quality delivery of a diet. Now, once these heifers had established or come accustomed to a particular diet, they now delivered these 3 different bins and watched the heifers for the next 15 to 20 minutes to study their behavior. And what they found is that once heifers got adjusted to a particular level or quality of feed, Now they were changing positions more frequently, and in other words, creating more interactions and eating for a shorter amount of time. So in other words, they were grazing the bunks, trying to find that diet that they identified as being the most of the highest quality. The results indicate here that non-uniform delivery, which is a real challenge in large pens of cattle, will increase competition at the bunk. Or from a commercial perspective, you're going to have considerably more cow movements and interactions during this critical feeding period, especially a couple hours after feed delivery. What it doesn't take into account, and I pose the next question, is what about the impact on individual cows not using the entire length of the bunk? What about social groups that develop? Cows tend to have a preference for a certain part of, in a University of Nebraska study, they made, on a farm case study, they made note that cows tended to have a preference for locations along the bunk and weren't willing to travel to other places within the pen. So you can see where this starts to have a significant impact on the variation of the quality of feed that an animal has to eat and sort through during the day. On the feeding environment side, social dynamics, as we just alluded to, cattle are creatures of habit. No surprise there. And so taking into account these social aspects, the results of sorting, the consumption of the diet can vary quite a bit during the day. And it depends on many factors. I've listed several of them there. It's certainly not conclusive, and we don't need to spend time talking about each one, but is it ration characteristics, or are we looking at social dominance, or our infrastructure design can all contribute to some of these many challenges. Social effects, if I can spend just a moment there, is closely related to age and body size. If you can refer to some of Pat Hoffman's work at the Marshfield Station here in Wisconsin, and they make the note that smaller animals are easily intimidated and frequently intimidated by the larger animals. So in the heifer pen, as little as 125 pounds difference can contribute to social inequities, if you will, that create problems at the feed bunk. But it also suggests why we need to pay special attention to the effect that it could have on first calved heifers. If sorting is a problem, what have been our traditional responses? Frequently, feed smaller amounts, feed it more frequently, add less hay, grind it more finely. All of those have some challenges with them. Just feeding higher quality hay, when indeed they all are fraught with some day-to-day challenges. Kernel processing and the addition of water as well as molasses were originally what was being suggested. But I suggest to you that there are other considerations about ration that affect performance that we've already looked at and will continue to discuss today, and that's the freshness, the palatability, and this uniformity, the variability, and the delivery of feed from one end of the pen to the other. Also consider water quality and its availability. It's a significant factor, and the frequency of delivering that feed. Twice-a-day feeding has been shown to increase the number of meals eaten, but of course it comes with a cost. It depends on the type of ration that you're delivering, but it also has impact on when we consider offering it at the most comfortable times of the day. In feedlot research, you saw that feed bunk that are fed to a managed fed or fed to a slick or clean bunk, we already have established that they feed fewer meals, that they eat larger meals, and they will admit that any deviation from their normal routine will have a higher increase of ruminal acidosis. Where does that have significant for us? Is it on the dairy side? Well, dairy cattle fed to a slick bunk or a clean bunk have been shown to eat 23% faster, so we're looking at some slug feeding, and it's clearly possible that if we feed to zero refusals, that we're going to predispose these cows to ruminal acidosis, one more problem that we don't need in keeping these cows healthy. So how long can a feed bunk be empty might be the question. We know that a cow's motivation to eat rises markedly after about 3 hours without feed. In a recent dairy nutrition conference this summer, Dr. Gordy Jones suggested that there's a maximum of 4 hours that these cows could be away from feed. British Columbia research has further suggested that restricting feed access, and where they saw it from 10 hours per day, and you can imagine between about 8 p.m. and 6 p.m. in the morning, that they documented dry matter intake was reduced by 3.5 pounds per cow per day. They also noted again that these cows were eating 25% faster, and they experienced twice the displacements. They also noted, and it's important to add to this, that facilities have their challenges, and we deal with them as best we can. In this case, where we talk about limited access to feed, which is defined as 16 to 20 hours per day, less than 16 to 20 hours per day that are with access to feed, and limited bunk space, if you combine the two, in this case 18 inches is the standard that we're using per cow, will only exacerbate the problem. And they found in situations and commercial operations where they studied that there was up to 3 times the displacements during that first 2 hours of critical morning feeding. So what is an empty bunk? You can find some work at Oregon that suggested you could go as far as 2.5% refusal at 18 hours post-feeding. Or if you refer to Minor Institute, they consider a functionally empty bunk is about 2% feed refusal at 24 hours. When Rick was at University of Nebraska in a on-farm case study there, they noted that cows that had a continued availability of TMR were producing up to 8 pounds more milk than those cows that were exposed to 6 hours of a functionally empty bunk. So as we piece some of these facts together, let's take a moment just to look at how do we analyze the bunks, if you will. The old adage here, I think, still applies, that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. On the measuring side, we need good records. There's one more thing you have to keep track of if your feeder isn't doing it now, but how much feed's delivered? How much was left at the end of the day? What time of day was it delivered? And in managing it, implementing change in a systematic way. For example, it has been suggested that adjusting a ration no more than 1 pound of dry matter per cow per day in the pen, and then waiting about 3 days before increasing it when you're on an upswing of changing diets. There's many systems out there. I would say put the one that works for you, put that one to work. For example, someone suggests, well, what would a bunk scoring system look like? Here's a very simple one, a 4-point scale where 0 has no feed left in the bunk, and 4 is large amounts of feed. In other words, you can't see the bunk surface. But like many of you, you're probably looking for something a little more detailed than that. Here, I want to send my thanks to Diamond V for letting me share their 10-point system here, which I think is very well done. And in this study, or in this suggestion, you can see that they have a 10-point scale with a description for each of these 10 points, with the optimal being a bunk score of 5. They not only provide you with a description, but they also give you an action plan as well, and I think this is invaluable. So what might that look like? Here's your optimum bunk score of 5. You have a slick bunk, maybe a few crumbs left in the bottom, and contrast that to a bunk score of 3. Here you have the empty bunk, which you got about 25% of the cows that are aggressively coming to the bunk, still looking for feed, and they make the suggestion that you want to increase it about 0.75 pounds of dry matter. Whether you adapt this or another one is, I guess, is a moot point, but it does give you a place to start. Contrast that to a bunk score of 7, on the other hand. 2 points the other way, where there's excess feed, well, it's about 2 inches left in the bunk. 20% of the cattle are standing around, and they suggest you could decrease the feed offered by about 10%. I think it's a wonderful place to start if you want to implement a bunk scoring scenario. They also shared with me that on this particular feed study, because as I mentioned, it's not well researched, we don't have a lot of data out there, and this is certainly has application to the producers in the audience, where you found that 5 out of the 6 herds saw an associated, and I emphasize associated, increase in dry matter intake as the refusals were reduced. Now, this is not cause and effect. Don't interpret that just because they reduced the refusals, the intake went up. There were other changes. This is a whole herd monthly summary, but I suggest to you that try it out on a pen or two, and if you're seeing a similar response, that you'd have some application here. So when feeding refusals, or ORTs, as we call it on the research side, or waybacks, how much is enough? Dogma, as we've established already, is 5%, and if we use the 5% figure, and for ease of calculation, if your cows are consuming 50 pounds of dry matter, you're delivering 52.5 pounds of dry matter a day just to see that they have continually have feed in front of them. So for the sake of this example, if that feed's worth about 10 cents per pound of dry matter, we have about 25 cents a cow or $25 per 100 cows, 100 cow pen per day. Now, Feed Supervisor also has some compelling data. This one is from 2001, where you can see some numbers there. But here they compared what I would consider two similarly managed farms. I've not been on these farms, but I would consider them rather similar. But Farm B, the one on the here, had reduced their cleanup by 4.5%. They equated that, or calculated that, excuse me, to over $18,000. In today's feed prices, I would suggest to you that's probably worth 2.5 times that. The point is that they were reducing their costs. They are effectively reducing their costs and not losing any milk doing it. So, question?
It looked like the higher dry matter intake there drove more milk production. So I would conclude that you want to get as much food as you could.
Yeah, and that's a valid. If you heard the comment that the dry matter intake drives milk production, and so this is still a fuzzy area, and point well taken. I'm going to try to get to that a bit more as we pass through, but there is some pretty compelling evidence out there that there are ways, but how do we make it work? And that's what I'm going to try to get to. So thanks for the comment there. So for feed refusal options, how to recover these costs? Because if you're going to feed for refusals, then do we just push it out the back door and put it in the manure pile? Well, no, feed's too expensive to do that. And I suggest to you there's only 3 places to put it. The first one would be to feed it to lactating animals. The advantage is we certainly would recover all the costs of that TMR we just put together, but the disadvantage is that profitability could be certainly at risk. The composition is typically unknown and is extremely variable from day to day, so how can you put that back into these finely tuned rations of high production cows? And if the result of the rejection or refusal here was because of quality problems, putting that back in is going to decrease dry matter intake, and ultimately milk yield would suffer from that. So I think it's safe to say here it's probably not worth the risk of putting in this particular diet. So let's throw it in with the dry cows. We have similar cost recovery. However, the disadvantage is, again, we have nutrient deficiencies or perhaps excesses that could create metabolic challenges, and so this could contribute to health disorders. Probably not. So that leaves the heifers. And this is typically what's happening, at least in my part of the world, consumption by the younger animals. And when fed to the older heifers, there's probably less risk. And so that's where a lot of it seems to be going. So it's probably the best option. However, keep in mind now we're not recovering the cost of the TMR, but you're applying that recovery to the cost of the heifer feed. So for sake of example, if a typical older growing heifer diet costs about 7 cents a pound opposed to the 10 cents a pound, and recall we were looking at about $250 per 100 cows, I'm sorry, 250 pounds, $25 per pen. We've now offset that by about $17.50. Now this is just an example, but the net cost ends up being about $7.50, a substantial change, a substantial savings in the cost of that expensive TMR. So feeding to a clean bunk would certainly save money. We acknowledge there's probably, in this example, about $225 per 100 cows per month, provided, and this is a big provided, is that there's no adverse effects on the milk production or on animal health. What would a dairy feed audit look like if you haven't been involved with one in the past? To start with, if you look at this table, University of Minnesota research done 16 years ago, they were looking at a commercial dairy and analyzing the amount of the composition of which is particularly long particles, of the refusal. Here at every 6 hours, 0, 6, 12, 18, and 24, they shook out the feed that was in the bunk. And as you can see, the amount of sorting that obviously took place early in the feeding period wound up with a lot of long particles later on. So they just used the Penn State shaker box. And so here's a good use of it, not only with the feed that's being delivered, but the feed that's being refused. Take a look at the composition of that. What's it look like? And in this case, it might look like this, where the long hay is not being properly processed and sorted and left at the end of the day. Another slide compliments of Diamond V, where they were using the same technology to look at a lactation ration. You can see there was something going on here as they took 10 samples over delivery to one pen, and entire load went to one pen. All of a sudden, the last 30% of the load, we were looking at a lot more dense feed laying in the bottom pan, and that critical middle layer that would, we look at this creates chewing, but this contributes to rumen health, that rumen mat. And so something's going on here. Well, what do you think was happening? They were overloading the mixer, and the mixer wasn't performing as it was designed to do. So it's interesting some of the things that can be brought out by doing a TMR audit. Now, to further support what they were suggesting here, after they made the audit changes, which was basically more consistent processing of the hay and proper loading of the TMR, look what was happening to, I didn't jump that, what was happening to, well, we'll do that again. Milk production was on an increase. This is over the next 30 days. They saw some increase in milk production, as well as a positive impact on milk fat and on milk protein. So even though there's not statistics applied to this, there certainly is implications that can be attached here to this kind of data. How do you go about conducting the feed audit? Here's some of the tools that are commonly used in the field. Some are rather extravagant, some are very simple. You see that I have highlighted the forage shaker box and the scoop, probably being the place to start. And if you're already using the feeding software out there like Feed Supervisor, TMR Tracker, Easy Feed, Feed Watch, and others, you have some of the tools already in place. Are you using them to look at the refusal side of your diets? I'm only going to make really one basic comment about using the shaker box, and that's using it correctly, 5 shakes in each direction for all 4 sides, repeating it twice. And then when you're making collections, and I would suggest that if you need the detail, you want the detail, 10 samples for each pen that are equally spaced. Also notice that they're using a scoop here and taking it from the bottom and from the middle, not from the top. Not just reaching in there and grabbing a hand sample because you got places to go, because the smaller, denser particles are going to fall to the bottom, and your hand's not as better sieve than it is a scoop. And so just think about properly using the tools that you have. Now, an audit's going to bring you to several areas of the operation, and here's some of the things that we've run into. On the TMR mixing variables, the ingredient side, you need to be looking at facing and blending of the silages. You're going to wonder and analyze the processing of the hay and the straws, or how consistent is the grind of the corn. On the mixer side, is it being properly loaded? Is it level? Is the processing time the correct amount of time, or is the feeder on the cell phone and being interrupted when this thing is running? All things that need to be considered, as well as the inclusion. Are they including low inclusion products in such a big batch and it's not doing it correctly? Loading of ingredients is probably an obvious one, and I've listed here the ingredient order. Now, it's certainly you need to refer to your manufacturer's instructions, and there's lots of them out here to look at. I was looking at a few of them last night, and all of them are great machines that can do a good job. But we know that vertical versus horizontal have some advantage when it comes to processing long forages. You also need to be aware that in order for mixing speed, sometimes wet sticky ingredients are put in right next to the dry ingredients, and they're sticking together and not getting adequately mixed in. The order of inclusion that's generally suggested has been listed here, but again, I qualify that by saying refer to your manufacturer's instructions. But generally, the long haze, followed later by the concentrates and the liquids going in last. Now, just a point on forage processing. It's nearly impossible for the feeder to put together a consistent TMR if your hay quality is inconsistent. And forages have the reputation of being extremely inconsistent as they've gone into the pile or into the bale. So what larger operations are doing in our area, at least those that have the ability to do so, is they are processing the hay in advance. And by doing this now, they're with fewer loads going into the mixer, they're getting a more accurate loading of the forages, and they're reducing their mixing time, and it contributing to a more uniform TMR. Now this next pictorial is only a graphic to fix in your mind the tendencies that worn parts, a worn TMR mixer, as it wears down, has on TMR consistency. And I think the glaring fact is if you look at haylage or corn, something that's already processed has just a marginal effect to it. But when it comes to the processing needs of our long hays, and particularly straws, they are drastically affected. And so maintenance and care of the TMR is extremely important, and I'll justify that in the next slide. This was also taken from the Diamond V, and I thank Tom Olberg for sharing this with me. They found 7 major mixing factors, and this was done on 317 loads, 317 loads of TMR. The glaring fact is that less than 30% of the loads were normal, 70% were not. And of that remaining 70%, 23%, just over 23% of the loads were mixed with worn wagons. So that repair could have changed that outcome drastically. For example, on one of our occasions to do an audit, we ran into a situation here. This feeder was doing an excellent job. You could check your stopwatch by him. He was so on target, on schedule, feeding, mixing time, and everything. Yet we were finding some inconsistencies in there. Upon closer inspection, as we looked at the vertical mixer, you could see that, and maybe you can see the enlargement here, but there's a hard surface on there that was collecting and holding back the more dense particles. And of course, I haven't even talked to him to see what kind of changes they've made for that, but that and speed was contributing to not getting a complete delivery of the feed that was being mixed. So when it comes to feed mixing and delivery, which plays into this whole challenge of reducing refusals, the TMR is an effective is an accurate and cost-effective method of delivering feed, but it can be a costly one if it's not maintained correctly, such as not only in good condition, but are the scales checked on a bi-monthly basis, and are you monthly going through and shaking out some of your refusals, at least in a minimum of 3 places, just to see if the refusal is representative of the diet that was delivered. The Penn State shaker box has many uses, and this shakeout here is fairly simple to do, doesn't take a lot of time, and then I would suggest that you have probably 5% or less variation from one sample to the next. That would be my target. A couple more comments on the loaders themselves. I am not on the mixers themselves, and I don't pretend to be an engineer and understand all the mechanics of these things. Like you, I want to get in and turn the key, and I want it to go in the morning, and I know that I have to maintain my car to keep it reliable, and you have to maintain these as well, but you also have to use them correctly. For example, the vertical mixer generally works best with high forages, which is well established, but are you loading it over the center? Is that TMR mixer sitting on the level, or is it sitting on a slope? All these seemingly insignificant little nuances can affect it. Many of the practitioners are recommending that they remove the blades, depending on their forage situation, or not changing all the blades at one time, only a third of them at a time, so they're not when they're having challenges, over-processing their forages. And keep in mind, they mix the best at about 75 to 90% of the capacity as opposed to that one you saw earlier that was significantly above the extensions that were on the top of that. So about a foot below the rim, not including the extension, would probably get you about 90% capacity. On the other hand, loading horizontal mixers, they're excellent when it comes to low forage diets or a lot of processed forages. They are slower mixing, but you also need to load them over the auger so they can do the job they were designed to do. And some of the practitioners tell me they prefer removing the restrictor plates. Be careful with long forages because it will wrap, and again, referring to your manufacturer's instructions. The ordering of ingredients we referred to earlier, and the manufacturer's specifications that I continue to emphasize, but generally you're going to start with your light fluffy hays that need processing, followed by grains, minerals, and lastly putting in the liquid. That liquid also should be put in a fan pattern, not just dumped in one corner of the mixer, and using the proper speed. Think about a cake mix. You got to have the egg beater going fast enough to make the mix uniform, there is a rather precise feed that these mixers need to be run at to do their job. And you're still going to have some trial and error as you adjust it to your situation. I'm also going to extend this to the managers and owners in the audience, that you need to help your feeder be successful. He or she probably has the most difficult job in the yard. At least as a nutritionist, I would defend that statement. You can do so by considering having all ingredients on site, so that you're not making long trips back and forth from the concrete pad to somewhere around the shelter belt. Minimizing the number of ingredients helps with the load time, and having easy to read sheets and a scale that's easy to read are imperative if that person is going to do the job that they intended to do. And I say that because management sometimes induces variations that's nowhere near the fault of the labor. For example, a new load of cows comes in, you've changed the pen environment, size, population, and so forth, or you've made a contracted feed that's now delivered and it's not of the same quality. You have made interventions which have unintended consequences and are out of the hands of the feeder. So you need to be in constant contact with that person and managing that team. Putting affordable technology to work. Many dairies now are putting in some rather sophisticated monitoring and video equipment. I understand that. But not all of us are willing to or are ready to do that. There are some rather inexpensive game camera-like options out there that you might be interested in. In this particular case, I'm going to show you an example, and this is where I'm going to turn the program over to you for just a moment on this next slide and make some observations on this particular feeding that is going on, and then we'll discuss it while I get a drink of water. What do you think? Any quick observations? Hard to see much going wrong there, was it? This is an operation that opened in the fall of 2008. And I filmed this well, you can see the date, on June 14th, on Flag Day. It was a Sunday. We had a tour out there, a dairy days, and I filmed 24 hours. I didn't show you 24 hours worth. I just took 2 hours and compressed it into about 30 seconds for you to take a quick look at. But the purpose for doing it is this is a rather inexpensive, or the purpose is to look at what the cows, and the method was using a rather inexpensive camera, which I'll share with you next. Certainly, observations can be made that you otherwise don't make because you only have so much time on your hands. For one, the feed wasn't delivered quite all the way to the left, as you noticed there. You might have noticed there was a few cows that were stretching just a little bit. Now let me preface this by saying this pen of cows was doing 110 pounds. There was almost 200 cows in that pen, and they were doing 110 pounds. So far from me to come in and say how you could do things better. But this, like many operations, is saying, what's one more thing I can do that I can get 1 more pound of milk out of it? They're currently at about 85 pounds, 86 pounds of milk on 1,300 cows. So it gives you an idea of the kind of job that they're already doing. But one of the suggestions might be is that perhaps feed could be delivered to the entire length of the bunk. We could pick up just a little bit more there, or start the push-ups immediately 2 hours after feeding. But you didn't notice it here because I just took some of the late afternoon, evening, but they had excellent interval between push-ups, and push-ups happen very consistently all night long. And there's a key to that, all night long. Here's what I've learned from using video technology, and this is the camera that I used right here. You can see the size of it. It's a Brino. It's a strictly video, no audio. You can put your SD card in there, and you can set it up for take pictures at whatever interval you like. And when you're not using it there, I shot the solar eclipse the other night too. It's kind of a fun little camera when you learn how to use that. But here's what I've learned: the cows eat all hours of the day. That's no news to this group, is it? Cows are territorial. You might have seen it there. That one white cow was obvious that where she continued to eat and didn't. But it's interesting that some cows will not go where there's feed, even though their chosen area of the bunk is devoid of feed. That in dairies that I didn't show you, restricted access is most common between, guess what, between 10 and 5 in the morning. And the result was really not empty bunk. It was just feed that was out of reach. And I see some nodding heads in here that's happening. So it's when you're a one-man, one-woman show, you got to get some sleep sometime. But there's where sometimes robots are now entering the scene that have really have an advantage. And lastly, I would say that the size of the push-out, or the percent refusal, is really a poor indicator of the feed access, because there was other problems. Just because that feed all got pushed out the door didn't mean that the cows refused it. They just couldn't reach it. And so it becomes a poor indicator of dry matter intake. It all gets back to this fuzzy box we call management, and the little things we can do that can have big results. So it wouldn't be an extension-like meeting, and I'm an extension specialist, where we might suggest some strategies. Take it or leave it. It's just some for thought-provoking discussion, because this, as I mentioned earlier, isn't well researched. And well, my boss once said, research anything you want, but I'm not going to pay for it. And here's an area that's hard to go out and get money for it. But that's the true, that's the academic environment for those that have research appointments along with our extension appointments. It can be a challenge. But the point is here that we know that major meals are often dropped right at milking, and we have good lockups then, and cows are eating. Do we need to do it then? As you can see by this one, feed drop represented by the big arrow, and this 3-time-a-day milking. What would happen if once a day, but you moved your feed delivery here? Well, I can already see a little bristling. I only got so much help and so much time during the day. But think about how might that work in your advantage. Or how about split feeding? Split feeding, putting it 4 hours after the morning and afternoon meeting. Here's a couple of justifications that I would share with you. That fresh feed that's delivered between milkings appears to encourage more meals and reduces some slug feeding that we are going to have because of the social and other crowding aspects of pens. But you're probably not going to see an increase in dry matter intake. Feeding twice per day, 4 hours, as I mentioned, 4 hours before, 4 hours after the morning and evening milkings will create more meals. If it creates more meals, we should be able to improve feed efficiency. Option 3, perhaps the twice a day might be one that smaller dairies could consider as they spread out their limited labor. These are good feeding strategies when you deal with cold or heat stress. For our southern neighbors who deal with heat, we don't envy you a bit, because we don't lose a pound of milk in the wintertime. We always get beat up on our cold winters, but it's not a bad time for cows at all. We just virtually never lose milk. So large dairies tend to have the available labor that could possibly implement it. Smaller dairies are looking at robots, push-up robots, that have a place. I just want to mention that several of the large dairies in our region, multi-state region, have adapted this practice, and after about 2 to 3 months, they're seeing some measurable improvements in feed efficiency, in this case defined as energy-corrected milk divided by dry matter intake. So in summary, you thought maybe I was never going to get there. TMR and refusal variation has many sources, whether it's on the ingredient side, whether it's between or within loads, or cow sorting factors. It's a fact of life. Good feed bunk management is as much a skill or an art that it is a science. It's one that can be learned as long as it's practiced. I'm told that it takes humans 6 weeks of doing something to become a habit, and in some cases it's habits that you have to break in the feed yard to get this accomplished. So I guess I should add to that maybe a little bit of patience goes with practice and experience. We all know that cattle are creatures of habit, and anytime we disrupt their feeding routine, we could disrupt intake. Critical elements here there are minimizing changes in the environment, reducing stress, and delivering feed consistently. In review, TMR mixing variables I listed here, the vertical, horizontal, and auger wagons, filling 75 to about 90% of the struck or capacity. But keep in mind on the vertical screws, a small load still needs to reach the top of the screws to get the feed mixed right. So perhaps that's a challenge for you, something you could look at. Horizontal or reel wagons fill about 70%. They're especially effective when it comes to mixing wet byproducts. Auger wagons, which are still the most common in my part of the world, fill to about 75%. Here's a checklist of auger TMR mixer wagon, but I would probably refer to, if you get Horace Dairyman, and most of you probably do, there's an excellent article that just came in the most recent September issue by Martin Williams and Abram about TMR checkups. But I will borrow this from Horace Dairyman. Last winter, associate editor Amanda Smith wrote, "Feed refusals are a balancing act." And I thought, what an excellent statement. As she goes to say here, and I think you will agree, there's a fine line between ensuring cows have adequate feed for milk production and minimizing the costs associated with what's left in the bunk. Feed bunk management is critical for feed efficiency. Going back to the early question, feeding to a slick bunk is common in feedlots and becoming more common in dairy heifer lots. However, keep in mind, growing animals are physiologically different than the dairy cow. For average daily gain, if we don't quite hit on target, we just feed them a few more days and then off to slaughter or off to their next stage of development. Or under compensatory environments, such as similar work that was done at NDSU many years ago, they looked at restricting the diet and then realiment it with extra nutrients. And those extra nutrients can help the animal reach the same target weight in the same amount of time. However, reduced milk yield cannot be made up tomorrow when it comes to the dairy animal. It has lasting effect when we start restricting feeds. The lactation gestation cycle, so once the cow's bred, also means that we cannot just milk her longer to make up those losses. So my caution to you today is that be very careful extrapolating feed bunk management data obtained from growing cattle to dairy cows. The cost benefit, there is costs and benefits, but the ratio does have some risk, particularly when feeding it to close-up dry cows as well as fresh cows. Why? Because they are naturally high variation in intake, as you saw from that Husey slide at near the very beginning. They are more vulnerable for obvious reasons with their stage of development to metabolic insults. And this is a pen that constantly has exit and entry, which creates social environment challenges. So as personal communication, as Tim shared with me, their feeling is that limiting intake here has way more risk than the cost of what their 5% refusal does. However, it's being done, and it's being done successful. So if you were looking for some suggestions when reducing refusals, approach it this way. For the fresh cow pen, look at probably a minimum of 2 to 4%. On high-producing cows, we can start reducing that 1 to 3% of refusal remaining. And on the late lactation, cut that even some more, down to 0.5%. And I think you would agree that those are probably attainable, because many of the people I talk to are already shooting for some of these limits. However, the catch-22 is here that, is the refusal resemble the diet? And that's why I spent so much time on the shaker box and the TMR audit. Because if it does, I think you're in a position to reduce your refusals. However, if your refusal is quite different from what's being delivered, then maybe you probably don't want to take that risk. So here's the take-home message. There is no one-size-fits-all. Reducing weigh-backs makes sense, but the industry has a long ways to go before we learn how to score and manage bunks like the feedlot industry has done for several years. So on one hand, feeding for 2% refusal at 24 hours does not appear to affect milk yield and will reduce feed costs and is a very attainable goal. However, if you were looking for a one-handed nutritionist today, I'm not the guy, because on the other hand, we have to keep in mind that income over feed costs may decline due to restricted feed intake, which is typically associated with poor implementation of a clean bunk strategy, and limit the cow's ability to express her full genetic potential. These are some of the references that I referred to today, and this will be streamed on internet, and I don't know if the slides are going to be made available too, but if you are interested, this is some of the resources that I found to use for information to provide for you today. I need to acknowledge the farms that allowed me to take some video and share with you today, along with the data from 2 companies that, in my role as the only extension dairy specialist in North Dakota, our success is based on our ability to work with others. And I need those partners in the field, and I hope they feel the same. They do. In this case, they were willing to share their data with me, and I very much appreciate that and need to extend that acknowledgement. And lastly, to DeKalb for providing me, which is the highlight of my dairy career, to be on a program today with you as part of World Dairy Expo, which started for me back in 1972, as mentioned there. So with that, I think we can say feed on. But keep in mind, in theory, there is no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is. I think I've shared that with you today. And if I could take a quote from Rick Grant in a recent article, never lose sight of the fundamentals of feeding management. That concludes my remarks, and be glad to try to take any questions. I appreciate your diligence, and thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this auspicious program. If I understand your question correctly, you're talking about time during the feeding period that might be most informative in terms of doing 3 to 10 shakeouts of the diet.
What you would consider a reasonable variation from that initial?
Well, these data were based on at the end of the day, making the assumption then that if the TMR refusal resembles what was delivered, that it should be good throughout the entire day. So I think the end of the day is the most critical. That's where we're going to see that, as you remember the slide from Martin where the sorting was out toward the end of the day. So I think if you're seeing a minimum sorting at the end of the day, you're good. Now, if you're seeing a lot of it, now you're saying, well, what happens if I go back to 12 hours and take a look? Go for it if you can. I think it's just going to be more information for you to make that decision. And you might be looking at some of the dynamics in the pen. But now we got to start looking at, okay, how many cows in the pen? What's the stage of lactation in these pens? And in many cases, it's the variations coming from these, like you saw with the Husey data on intake, it's various parity in the cows. It was various stages of their, when they were going to calve. And so there are all those factors that come in. So yeah, I would say there's no clear way to do it. If you're doing it, you're a step ahead of 90% of the other producers. Thank you. Over here.
Knowing how important fallibility is, has there been any work done during the process of watching the feed as it sits out there longer and longer and longer to improve the fallibility? Not so much when it's first put out, but as it gets pushed up, knowing cows tend to not like feed that's been breathed on by another animal sort of thing, as it gets pushed back and back and back up to the cow. Put anything to enhance the flavor, but has that been looked at?
The question is, has anybody looked at maintaining the quality of the TMR once it's delivered, particularly with wet feeds that degrade over time? And once we've reduced some of it happening at the pile by doing proper facing, what about those wet feeds during those 90-degree days and how it's, and I'm not aware enough of what's been done to be able to answer your question, but would suggest to you that where people have been using some of the lactic acid bacteria, treating their wet forages, particularly silage and haylage. There are like the albucneri that reduce the loss in quality and palatability. So the lactic acid bacteria is great during storage, but then you have some more waste at feed out or more loss of quality at feed out, where the albucneri and the butyric have some positive effect on that end. So I can't answer your question directly. I'm sure there's some work being done, but in case of with the information that I have, I don't have any more than that, other than looking at the use of some of these inoculants to extend the shelf life of your wet forages. Thanks for the question.
So my question is about the mixer wagons we used. What type of mixer wagons the horizontal or vertical is the best for mixing the TMR to minimize the salting, based on your experience? And then more than this, it should be the single auger or the double auger, improving the feed efficiency.
If I'm hearing the question properly, you're putting me on the spot by asking my opinion on what is the best mixer out there. And I won't go there in terms of the best one. But you saw, I tried to relate to you where mixers have their advantage. And if you're expecting processing of long hay at the feeding pad, then the vertical processors have, vertical TMR mixers seem to have a leg up on that. But they all work when they're properly, when you load them properly and when they're properly maintained. So I'm sure this is an area that has just as much opinion as it does fact on that. But anybody else? If not, it's been great being with you. Thanks so much.
Introduce myself. I'm Daphne from, it's a publication called Dairy Business Worldwide,
Okay.
based in Singapore. And I'm just wondering if, I could perhaps, because what we have in our magazine is a